Hey y'all, I wanted to talk to you about the game of sticks. A little while ago, it got into my head the idea that I wanted to know more about whether sticks was a game that was winnable by the first player or by the second player or not at all, or just how complicated it was. Before I get started, I had to figure out what the rules were that we play with. And the rules are that, well, there's the basic things that, basically the game of sticks is you start out with one and one on each of your hands. The other person's the same. When you touch their hand, you add the number that's on your hand to their hand, like that. If it goes to five, then that person's hand is zero and they're out. If it goes over five, then the math is like modulo five. Modulo means take the remainder, and then you get whatever the remainder is. So like if I have four on one hand, I went with two. Well, that's six, and modulo five, that's a remainder of one. So this person would go to one. So that's the basic rule. And then we also have a rule for bumping, where you're only allowed to bump when you have an even number of fingers on one hand and zero on the other hand. You can go bump like this and move some from this hand to that hand to make it even. Looking around, it looks like there's other rules other people have, but those are our rules. Also, you can't play on an empty hand. That hand is dead unless the person bumps to do it. So anyway, those are the basic rules. And I was thinking, like, how many games are there? I kind of wanted it to be very small, like I could visualize it. First of all, how many different hands are there? It turns out that if you think about it, there's you have five fingers in this hand, well, five positions, 4 through 0. 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 on this hand, and 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 on this hand. And so you might think it's 5 times 5, but in fact, if you think about it, if I have 2 fingers on this hand and 3 on this hand, in terms of what I can do, it's exactly the same as if I had 3 on this hand and 2 on this hand. So really, it's you don't want to count things that are just permuted between the two hands. So that would be, 5 possible. Like say you start with 0 here, then there's 5 different possibilities over here, and then with 1 here, there's only 4. So it's 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1, which I actually figured out a little bit about how the math works to do that particular summation, and realize that way that maybe I won't ever forget it again. I can maybe explain that later. But anyways, the answer is going to be n times n plus 1 over 2. So there's 5 combinations times 6 is 30, divided by 2 is 15. But then you realize that there's one combination that can't actually happen in the game, which is both hands being 0, because that's not really a position you could be in when it's your turn. Because that's a key realization, is that the game is symmetrical, so you don't have to think of it differently. Like if I have 1 and 1 and you have 2 and 2, well, it's one of our turns, and that's what matters. It doesn't matter, like it's not really a position to be in when it's not your turn. And so, there's a symmetry there, not like in chess where there's black pieces and white pieces that are different. So that means there's only 14, because you can't count the 0, 0, because that's not a position that you can actually be in to be anybody's turn. The game's over in that spot. So that means there's 14, and 14 times 14 is 196. There's only 14 ways your hands can be, and 196 different ways the game could be. And so that got me thinking about the first question I wanted to answer, which is, how many of those positions are reachable as you play the game? Because we have a lot of restrictions on what you can do. You can't just arbitrarily move your fingers from one hand to the other, for example, like in some versions of the game, which means that it might be possible that you can't reach all the hands. And you think about it, like that's really the case in lots of other games. Like in chess, you think about all the ways you could arrange the chess pieces on the board. Only a tiny fraction of those ways are ways that actually match up to a game. There's not, there's so many restrictions in the way that the board can be laid out. You can't have all the pawns in the last row, or any of the pawns in the last row. They have to start out one row forward, and you can't get them. You can't have. There's all different ways you can't arrange the pieces. Of course, you can only have so many of each piece. You could actually get like 5 knights if you promoted all your pawns. But so that we're talking about just the possible games, not the possible good games. I'm sure no one ever has promoted 5 enough to get 5 knights at once. But so and maybe a better example that's even simpler to think about closer to this one is tic-tac-toe, where in addition to the restrictions, like you can't have, you have to have the same number of X's as O's, or maybe one more X if X's go first. You also have the restriction that, you can't have 2 people who've won. And, there's certain, like you can't have 3 X's here and 3 O's here and nothing in the middle, because someone would already have won before that. So that's the first question I want to think about, which is like, how many of these 196 positions are there to get at? Oh yeah, I also wanted to give you an example just to prove to you that there's at least some some states that are not reachable. And the one that came to mind very quickly for me when I thought about this, actually late at night, was everybody having 4 fingers up. So I have 4 fingers up here and here. You have 4 fingers up there and there. And let's say it's your turn. How did this happen? How did we get to this position? Well, in order for you to have 4 fingers up at each of your hands, I had to have made some move. Well, I can't have just bumped because I've got 8 fingers up. That's more than on one hand. And I can't have played on either of your hands because the only way to get from a 4 to another 4 would be for your hand to be 0, and I can't play on a 0. So it's just not possible. No one can play a game of sticks and end up with 4 fingers on each of their hands. Anyway, I'm also kind of interested in this idea because if it turns out that there's a lot of them that aren't reachable, you can imagine a new version of sticks in which you actually chose some random. You have to choose behind your back, say what the number of fingers that you had to start with, and that could really randomize things and make things a little bit more exciting. But anyway, put your guess in the comments or send it to me or something.